The human body is truly a marvel. For many millennia, us as humans have developed a strong resilience and immunity to most natural hazards, be they of biological nature or not. However, due to the progress of industrialization, we find ourselves more and more testing the bounds of our planet. And in order to advance scientific progress, more and more we're exposed to elements foreign to the human body, as well as being in contact with them more than any of our ancestors have. So what happens when an encounter with one of the most dangerous substances of the planet goes horribly wrong? Hello everybody, my name is Doc Feedy, and this is the first video of its kind of my new channel where I like to look at strange and unsettling true fates that people such as you and I have suffered through. Since I'm a medical doctor, I have a special inclination to discuss fascinating cases with a medical touch that have befallen the human body, but that will not be my only focus. So, if you like the content you're about to watch, consider smashing the like button or subscribing to see more content such as this. And with that being said, let's bury ourselves into this case. On the 17th of March 1987, it was a usual work day for the men in the Swedish copper smeltery. Sweden was just getting out of its notorious cold winters, and the first rays of sunshine of the day started to melt the morning dew of the dull, early spring grass. And while the cold was still undoubtedly troubling the average city-goer, the men working in the smeltery surely were not that cold, be it through the heat of the large machines that they were operating, or the sweat of their own work. Now, the copper that we see daily is not the product that directly comes out of the ground. All ore must not only be removed from the ground, but also concentrated, meaning that you remove commercially worthless minerals from the initial ore and then smelt it, which is to produce the desired metal from the ore. This process is obviously not only very cost-intensive and requires hard physical labor, but also produces a lot of environmentally unfriendly and dangerous byproducts. However, because these products are so dangerous, all of the workers have to study and train the proper safety protocols when it comes to prevention and handling of these materials. So, on that morning of March 1987, the workers were tasked to clean out one of the waste disposal silos, a huge 25-meter tall silo nonetheless, which was a cylindrical, austere-looking building whose purpose really outshined its bleak design. But despite its harmless demeanor, the man tasked to work inside the silo knew exactly what they were dealing with. They had worked with the smelting byproduct before, manually, much so, and with that they strapped on protective gear, including protective masks. Now, the product they had been working with was crusted inside the silo, so to unload it, it took them several hours until the middle of the day to free the product from the walls and to return it to its natural state in the silo, which was this white, powdery dust. However, in order to minimize the workload inside this huge silo, scraping off the dusty white powder from the inside, and minimize its explosion time, they didn't do this task manually. They used explosives. But the man couldn't account for one thing. As the undoubtedly experienced men were using the TNT in a controlled fashion, what they could not have known is that due to its propulsive force, a volt, meaning a significant quantity of the product, much like an isolated pocket, was formed as a result of the detonations way up in the silo and stuck to it like a fragile droplet of water waiting to bounce from the bathroom faucet. One of the men, standing just outside the open door of the silo, was suddenly swept away from his feet and drowned in the copious amount of white, dusty substance that immediately engulfed his being. He just so happened to be in the affected perimeter when the vault dissolved and crashed to the ground. His work colleague saw this and immediately rushed towards him, but among this huge pile of dust and debris, the victim seemed to be swallowed whole, and with his hands, one by one, he clawed, and it took him 1 to 2 minutes to actually free the trapped worker's head, but what he saw shocked him. Because the trapped worker couldn't free himself in time, he nearly suffocated for several reasons. 1. Due to the probably high amount of pressure exerted on his thorax restricting his breathing. 2. Due to his environment being dense, solid matter, preventing him from actually inhaling oxygen. And 3. His mask, due to overwhelming amounts of dust, was clogged with it. So, in a desperate attempt to breathe, obeying his natural instincts, the trapped worker frantically ripped off his mask, but as a result, the man ingested and inhaled massive amounts of the substance. And that substance was arsenic dust. One of the byproducts of copper smelting is arsenic, most of which is obtained by the processing of several ores, including copper, lead, and gold. While also a natural mineral, it is only the Earth's 53rd most abundant element and makes up 0.00015% of the Earth's crust. It is used industrially, such as in car batteries, certain semiconductors, and herbicides, as well as insecticides, but is also one of the most toxic elements that a human can interact with. be it by accident or by intentional poisoning, as documented by several illustrious poisoning cases. And this worker had been buried in it. While chronic arsenic exposition leads mostly to cancer of the lung and skin, peripheral nerve damage, and generally visible changes to the skin, acute poisoning in big quantities can lead to structural damages to the skin as well as the several mucous membranes that we find in our body, such as the lungs, stomach, intestines, and mouth, leading to painful and bleeding ulcers, as well as edema, i.e. swelling. And when inhaled in big amounts, not only damages it the mucous membrane of the lung, leading to difficulties breathing and chest pain, but it can also lead to hemolysis, which is, per definition, the destruction of your red blood cells and thus of the oxygen-carrying essential hemoglobin, depriving you of oxygen in your blood. Thus, arsenic can not only lead to asphyxiation from the outside by causing damage and swelling to your airways, but it can also asphyxiate you from the inside, leaving you with no oxygen to be transported to your organs, even if you had all the air to breathe in the world. Adding to that, the man had not only inhaled, but also swallowed a significant amount of arsenic, which can end up in severe stomach pains, nausea, and vomiting. When the worker was freed, he was immediately sent to the Occupational Health Service Center of his workplace, where the first examination actually took place. There, he was still conscious and even walking from the car into the center. That, however, changed roughly 40 minutes after the initial exposition, when he was sent to the nearest hospital, where he started to vomit and cough, reporting himself that he was experiencing trouble breathing. There, doctors found that his heart rate was elevated. It was noted that during the percussion of the lungs, where the doctor uses his hand to test the lungs' resonance, a dull sound was heard. This was not normal. This sound meant that the original air inside the lungs was replaced with a more dense material, in this case the arsenic dust, which meant that in 2/3 of the man's left lung, as well as his bottom part of his right lung, the arsenic dust had filled his airways and was congesting his lungs and airways. Immediately, when such admittedly rare cases of poisoning with toxic materials, including overdoses of medicine, occur, which, on a side note, I also had to treat during a few of my shifts, we call specialized poison hotlines, which is exactly what happened here. Now, the team of doctors and nurses knew what they were up against. All they needed was the right measures and time. They quickly started a gastric lavage to clean the substance from the man's gastrointestinal tract and administered active charcoal, a commonly used substance to absorb toxic substances trapped in the gastrointestinal tract. He was administered cortisone to act as an anti-inflammatory agent to reduce airway swelling and thus possible asphyxiation. He was given an antihistaminic on top to prevent reactive airway constriction due to the toxic material in the lungs, as well as an antibiotic. But this wasn't enough. When dealing with intoxications of a dangerous level, what you need is an antidote. And at 5:10 p.m., so almost 4 hours after the initial event, he finally received BAL, British anti-leucide, or 2,3-demercaptan-1-propanol, a so-called chelate, serving as antidote to catch all the arsenic in the body and to neutralize it. But after all, it did seem too late. During the next hours, the worker's blood work seemed to indicate that his blood was turning sour, which means that in a lowered blood pH level, the little oxygen the worker had tied to his dissolving hemoglobin in his red blood cells sticked even harder to it, so that less of it got to his vital organs. At 6 p.m., his blood pressures fell to a dangerously low 45 mm mercury systolic, and he went into shock. At 7 p.m., the man went into ventricular fibrillation and lost his pulse. Despite the medical team initiating CPR and the worker being intubated, and after several adrenaline and atropine injections, the man's skin turned more and more blue, and he was pronounced dead at around 7:20 p.m., exactly almost 6 hours after the arsenic dust buried him and put him into a premature grave. During the autopsy, there were many bleeding spots found inside his airways below his vocal cords, along with significant swelling. On a microscopical level, bleeds were also found in his thyroid and intestines. There were also hemorrhages in the inner layer of his heart, as well as the adjacent muscle tissue of the heart. It could have also resulted, however, from the initiated CPR and several intracardial injections that the doctors at the time undertook to restart the circulation. The autopsy furthermore revealed that the man had breathed in and swallowed unbelievable amounts of arsenic trioxide, with levels 100 to 1,000 times higher in his body fluids than the average person without a professional exposition to arsenic. The tissues most affected by the poisoning were the liver, followed by the lung and kidneys. Looking over the doctor's treatment procedures, it seems that they did everything by the books. 1. They tried to prevent further ingestion of the arsenic by trying to clean out the man's gastrointestinal tract. 2. They administered the antidote BAL to catch the toxic compounds already inside the body. And 3. They treated and tried to prevent occurring symptoms, such as the difficulty breathing with anti-inflammatory agents, or, later on, the dipping blood pressure and pH with intravenous medication. But seemingly, there was very little to nothing they could do. This was ruled an unfortunate accident, and the smeltery used new preventative measures. Cleaning and unloading the arsenic was now to be done while standing at the top of the silo, with explosives down below, and new security perimeters have been established. And that was the first case. Thank you for watching. I hope that you have enjoyed the content. If you have any suggestions or corrections, let me know in the comments and I will gladly reply if time allows it. Some of you might have wondered that certain pronunciations may have sounded off, and that's because I am not a native English speaker. I have not practiced medicine in English outside of certain English-speaking patients that I had, but I hope that time allows me to fix that, with your correction of course, and I'd be really happy if I saw you next time. And with that, take care.